The Association of American Medical Colleges is pleased to welcome you to today's webinar, Managing Microaggressions in Medicine, Strategies to Identify, Address, and Regroup. My name is Jennifer, and it is my pleasure to facilitate. I'd like to welcome everyone joining us today. Please note we are recording, and the archive will be available online in 3 to 5 business days. We did mute all participant audio and video. If you need help, please email aamc@compartners.com. This presentation will last up to 90 minutes and does include plenty of time to answer your questions. So please do submit your question at any time using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. During Q&A, our presenter will answer as many questions as time allows. Please note that you can view and download the handouts for this session from the Handouts tab where you logged in today. It is now my pleasure to welcome Dr. Adam Thompson-Harvey. Welcome, Dr. Thompson-Harvey.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Dr. Adam Thompson-Harvey. I'm a fourth-year resident in otolaryngology, head and neck surgery at the Medical College of Wisconsin. I serve as representative for the Society of University Otolaryngologists to the AAMC Organization for Resident Representatives, where I also serve as a member of the administrative board. As the co-lead for the ORR work group on diversity, equity, and inclusion, I would like to welcome all watching live and via recording to part 2 of a webinar series in collaboration with the AAMC group on diversity and inclusion. And this is focused on identifying and addressing structural and interpersonal expressions of racism that afflict healthcare collaboration. In the previous webinar in February, we discussed tangible tools to tackle real-time situations and facilitate a culture of active anti-racism in the workplace. In this evening's webinar, we're fortunate to have Dr. Valencia Walker lead us through how to identify and manage microaggressions. It is our hope that you will lead tonight with some long-term strategies to address the effects of persistent microaggressions on both a personal and professional development. At this time, I would like to introduce our moderator for the evening, Dr. Amina Farouk. Dr. Farouk is a 5th-year resident physician in radiology at the Mather Hospital. It's at Northwell Health Mather Hospital in Long Island. She plans to pursue interventional radiology. Originally hailing from Atlanta, Georgia, Dr. Farouk has received her medical degree from the Medical College of Georgia, completing her internship in Atlanta before moving to Long Island for her diagnostic radiology residency. Now, we'd be here for a while if we listed all of her many accomplishments and leadership roles, but I will note that she serves as the associate manager of the RAD-AID International Breast Imaging Program. She chairs the membership subcommittee of the ACR-RFS and has served as a secretary/treasurer, vice president, as well as president of the New York State Radiologic Society for Residents and Fellows. She is passionate about global and women's health, especially as it pertains to women's imaging, as well as diversity, equity, and inclusion. So at this point, please welcome Dr. Amina Farouk.
Thank you so much, Adam. It is a pleasure to be here, and thank you all so much for attending. I am really honored and excited to be introducing our speaker for this evening. It's Dr. Valencia Walker. She is the Associate Chief Diversity and Health Equity Officer, amongst many other titles at Ohio State. And she completed her undergrad at Florida A&M. She also is a fellow Georgian, getting her medical degree from Emory University School of Medicine. And amongst many other accolades, she is a champion for eliminating maternal and infant health inequities. We are really happy to have her today to speak on microaggressions, and it's my pleasure to welcome her. And thank you all for being here today.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for showing up on a Monday. That's late at the night for those of us that are on the East Coast. I'm going to jump right into this, but I really want to encourage you to use the chat. And honestly, if there's just something you're like, hey, this happened today. Can we talk about it? I hope that everyone here is coming in with the idea that this is a space for us to really think about how to address these issues. So I want to start, as you heard, I am here at the Ohio State University and Nationwide Children's Hospital. So I want to just briefly pause and acknowledge our First Nations, our Indigenous people. The Ohio State University is a land-grant institution. We do understand about the forcible removal of First Nations peoples from their land as the original caretakers and the connection that they still have and the ways that that's been exploited and people have benefited. Here, just to name a few of the First Nations that were affected, the Seneca, the Wyandot, the Delaware, the Miami, the Lenape, the Seneca, even some of our Cherokee peoples. With that, these are tough conversations to have, no matter how many times you have them, no matter how much you think you're engaged or not engaged. And so I want to leave space for that. I have my contact information at the end, and you're welcome to reach out to me. I also want to remind you of something that I am personally motivated by, and that is this quote from James Baldwin. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced. Now, if we were to translate that into 2022, you miss every shot you don't take. Now, with that, these are my disclosures. Something else you should probably know, I'm pretty nerdy, which means I'm really into the current season 2 of Star Trek Picard, and I've already finished the latest season of Star Trek Discovery. If you've never done Star Trek, I think I can talk you into at least Star Trek Discovery. But of course, we're talking about microaggressions tonight, and that's complicated. And I want to have some advice for you. For those of you that are coming into it, regardless of what you think your perspective is or what you think your own experiences have been, just remember that what is highly visible to you can be completely invisible to others. And part of what we're here today is to illuminate those things that we don't always see. And to know that just because we haven't always seen them doesn't mean that they aren't absolutely real. This work is uncomfortable. Talking about this is uncomfortable, sharing these different perspectives and understanding that people are coming and influenced by their lived experiences. And so honoring that in this space, but also understanding the why. I've told you a few reasons why people may have discomfort, but it's often layered and it's much more difficult. And so I say all of that because, often people are already kind of set in their perspective, again, based on their own lived experiences or realities. And so there may be just automatically a, hey, I need to disagree or push back or things like that. But I ask you to really come to this space with a genuine curiosity and a desire that even if you've heard a talk on microaggressions already 10 times this year, that maybe there's one little piece that you can take away from this and feel like you've learned something new. So our objectives, we'll go over some key terms and concepts related to microaggressions. I will provide some examples that hopefully you'll be able to identify at least 2 examples when you see them. Again, mostly in our professional lives, but we know professional and personal are often blurred. And then looking at applying strategies for responding to microaggressions. But if I had to sum it up, an awareness, an acceptance, but most key, an activation. Once it happens, what do you do? Before it happens, how do you prepare? After it happens, what next? So starting off, this is where I would love for you to kind of pop in the chat for me. And I'm gonna try to maximize this a little bit so that you can see these pictures that I am showing. All right, you ready? Okay, pop quiz. If I say peanut butter, what's the first thing that pops in your head? All right, I got a few comments coming through. I think I see some consistency in some of those answers there. Okay, let's try a different one, because I've learned not everybody grows up in the United States, so jelly isn't always the next thing that comes to mind. If I say red, white, and, what's the next word that comes to mind? Okay, seeing again some consistencies. I really would love to know that the green. Let me give you another one. If someone says snake, what's the first thought that comes to mind for you? Run, ooh, boots, danger, step, belt. Awesome. All right. If I say a young Black man in a hoodie is walking down a street at night in this neighborhood. So we started off and we put all these things together to kind of understand that, yes, our brain is always organizing and categorizing information. And we do it in ways that are often automatic. I don't think anyone really struggled to kind of say, you know, peanut butter sandwich, peanut butter jelly, you know, all of that was almost instantaneous. It was probably the easiest test you'll take all day. We can do that with pets versus wild animals. And the idea is that because of the way our brains work, we can associate two things together really quickly. So when we talk about bias, yes, is this idea that our brain has taken and processed information and we're able to put it together really, really quickly because we start to create pattern recognitions. And this definitely shows up in healthcare. You know, as a kid, you learn how to tie your shoes because you understand the pattern of like how you have to put the laces together. It's the same as throwing your sutures. I mean, it's literally the way we design scripts. If I say that, you know, I have a 16-year-old young woman who comes into the emergency room and she has a shuffling gait and she's kind of holding her abdomen and she seems to be in pain. For quite a few of you, especially those of you who may be in peds like me, you're kind of already thinking about the test that you want to run or things like that. You know, for those of you that are maybe more in adult medicine, someone comes in and they're just like, doc, you know, I've got like this crushing pain in my chest. It's hard for me to breathe. Just, you know, and they have this kind of sense of doom. I'm glad I'm not you and I'm not working in adult medicine. But again, there's this automatic kind of like thought process that we've learned to kind of associate based on how those symptoms come together. So, oh, that was bad. Okay, I think I'm still sharing, but I'm not sure what happened. So I have a video that I wanted to show, and I'll just show the first part of it right away that really kind of gets into that idea of, you know, just how implicit bias is, how we all started talking about this.
Implicit bias.
Implicit bias.
Implicit bias.
2016 was the year that implicit bias went somewhat mainstream.
Yeah, so when Hillary Clinton mentioned implicit bias in the debates, our phones started blowing up, all our friends started emailing us about it.
But what is implicit?
So, you know, we've kind of already talked about it a little bit in terms of what it is, but there's one thing, and this is from Dr. Banaji, who's one of the women or one of the researchers, she's a woman who really started kind of putting this concept out there for us with a book that they wrote back in 2010. But what a lot of people leave out about implicit bias, they're like, yeah, everybody has biases. Yeah, you know, our brains is just the way they work. But the key to what she actually wrote about was that implicit biases come from culture. And that idea that we associate two things together very quickly, yes, our brains do that, but it's all about what we teach ourselves and what we choose to associate. And a lot of that, of course, is influence from the culture. So a lot of you may be on Instagram or other social media platforms, and so you're aware of kind of like the way that, you know, influencers happen all around us, right? So what I want you to do is in the chat, I would love for you to just put in who are the 3 to 5 people that have influenced you the most. And it can be one person, it could be 2 people, but at least 3 people that have significantly influenced you. Awesome. So seeing quite a few answers come through, this is great. Okay, so I see there's a lot of consistencies in answers, few famous people showing up. Definitely respect that. Now, here's the harder question. Who's willing to be brave tonight and tell me how that person has influenced you and why? Oh, I think, oh, I forgot. We may be difficult for you all to come off of mute, right?
I think so, yeah. I just wanted to say that if anybody wants to, they can just click on mute and you would like them to just speak, right?
Uh-huh.
Okay, all right. If anyone would like to do that, please feel
Oh,
free.
there are a couple of, I'll read a couple of the answers that are also in the chat. So not being intimidated, resiliency, someone who is an encourager and a role model, desire to make that person proud. So those are two great answers in the chat. And then if anyone else wants to ask to unmute, we'd love to hear your story and have you share. Well, let me explain part of the reason why I brought this up. What we know about the power of influence, which is often the power of culture, right? What influences you is the culture around you, is that you end up being the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Now, this is actually a quote from someone who's like, guru business leader and things like that. But it was the idea of, you could tell a lot about what shaped your work ethic and your morals and your values based on those people that had the most influence on you. And I want you to keep that in mind because it's obviously very relevant to how people develop their stereotypes and their prejudice. Now, you heard, I grew up in Georgia, went to Emory for medical school. And so this cartoon is kind of funny to me. Like, I refuse to be friends with Southerners. Don't you think they're so horrible? I'm like, wait, I'm a Southerner. But the difference is when we're talking about discrimination, we can't just mix and match those words because it's having a stereotype or a prejudice, and particularly a prejudice, that you can then take action on, that you have the political power, the political influence. And when I say political, I just don't mean like what party affiliation you have in terms of our political structure, but political in terms of your influence in situations, systems, and cultures. And the reason why I bring all of these things up, bias and prejudice and stereotypes and discrimination and influencers and how things influence you, because those biases are also tied into our blind spots. And so when we talk about that, there's another important concept we have to get to here, and that's that idea, what is privilege? So anybody, just drop in the chat for me your definition of privilege. So I see power and advantage you have over others, an advantage, being afforded certain graces naturally, having the benefit of not having a negative experience. I think that's really helpful to kind of frame it that way. Having something provided rather than earned. I think that's something that often comes up when we talk about privilege. Okay, so privilege, if we use a dictionary definition, is a special right, advantage, which you all pointed out, or immunity. And this is kind of like, I think when someone was alluding to not having something happen, that's granted or available only to a particular person or group. So you may have heard of like diplomatic immunity, right? That's a privilege, but you have to be a diplomat in order to have that diplomatic immunity. So then I want to ask you a different question. Is privilege a good thing, a bad thing, or is it neutral, neither good or bad? And you can, just drop your opinion in the chat, what you think. So I've got good and bad, neutral, depends on context of the question mark. I appreciate that. Depends on who and how it's used. That's a great response. Neutral, but can be used negatively. Depending on how it used, it can be used for good. So it's really great to kind of have those two answers like directly contrasting each other in our comments. So that's really, really helpful. Well, another thing that came up and someone mentioned about it being earned. So is privilege earned something you earn, or is it something that is unearned? What do you think about that? And so you can just type in the chat, earned or unearned, stake your position. So we have a couple of votes. Maybe some people are kind of thinking about it. Starting to shift more towards both. That's interesting. Okay. So mainly unearned, but gain privileges to education and other power dynamics. Thank you, Paula. Yeah, so you guys are really kind of like thinking about this both ways. Okay. So if we go back to that definition, technically there is nothing in there about it, whether or not it's earned or unearned. So I'm going to talk about me and acknowledge what I think are my privileges. I think I do have advantages because of certain identities that are me. I'm cishet, cisgender, heterosexual. And I know sometimes when I give this talk, not everyone's familiar with kind of the different like phrases and terminology. So like I can put up like the real old school version of the gingerbread person, because it's pretty simplistic. Like there's identity and expression and orientation and things like that. Then the gingerbread person kind of got like a little fancier, and we started like really trying to help people differentiate those things. But I think one of the ways that I like that it's done now is this idea of the gender unicorn, that still helps us break down like your identity, your expression, who you're physically attracted to, emotionally attracted to, or your sex assigned at birth. So then I go back to, I identify as someone who's cisgender and heterosexual. I'm a US citizen. Interestingly enough, my father was in the military, so my brother was born in a different country, and he was a citizen by birth in that country, but then he was also born to US citizens, so he carried dual citizenship. That story is actually complicated because for one of his scholarships to college, he had to specifically revoke his citizenship to that country that he was born in order to accept the scholarship. I was brought up in the Christian faith. We went to church on Sunday. There are a lot of activities around that idea of being a Christian and worship and religion. And of course, I'm a physician. And all of those things have afforded me incredible opportunities and advantages as a result of those identities. Even with all of those privileges, which have allowed me to gain a different socioeconomic status, to access certain types of education and insurance and all these other types of where I live in a neighborhood, I can still acknowledge that my parents, when they turned 21, which was the voting age at the time, they did not have the right to vote in this country. So when we talk about like the Civil Rights Act and all these other things, we're not talking about something that happened like years and years and years and years ago. We're talking about what happened that affected my parents, just one generation. But not only that, it was my own experiences I've had that even with all of those privileges, and even as I've acquired those things, it hasn't necessarily changed in terms of my identity as a Black person, and often specifically a Black woman, how I've encountered racism, stereotyping, and negative implicit biases. That same neighborhood that I have the privilege to live in because of my higher income and my socioeconomic status and ability to like purchase a home and things like that, I've been harassed in that neighborhood. My mom has come to visit as an older, senior citizen woman, harassed in that neighborhood that I used to live in. I don't live in that neighborhood now, but that's still been my experience. Now, I wanted to talk about privilege first, because of course there's this idea of like white privilege. And this was a tweet from a few years ago. And it's this idea, some people are like, oh, white privilege is not a thing. And it's just, people want to discredit hard work and try to ascribe it to this imaginary privilege that is racially based. Well, when we're talking about white privilege, privilege does not imply easier. As you all have very well pointed out, you often have to work hard to gain the advantage that allows you to have privileges that you aren't afforded in other ways. And particularly for white people, when we talk about privilege, we're not ascribing that because you have privilege, you are responsible for something that was an historical event. And we're also not automatically saying that is the same thing as being someone who's racist. But at the same time, you can quote unquote check your privilege and not have it be something you feel guilty about or something you feel helpless to do anything about it. We often as physicians use our privilege all the time to advocate for our patients, to advocate for changes in the healthcare system. It's part of the reason why a lot of you probably showed up tonight, exactly so we could figure out how in the moment when I encounter these situations, can I step in and do something to change an experience to try to level that hierarchy, that mistreatment that's often, racialized or gendered, or it's ableist, or it's xenophobic, so that we can do something to make it better. And this is irrespective of it being, white privilege, but because we live in a society where we have something that we have put into law and then had to make illegal, but it's still a part of our society and our culture, where we have a hierarchy, we have a caste system, and that caste system has been racialized based off of, when we talk about racism, we often have to be specific and not just say racism, but say anti-Black racism, because of all the ways we've seen that no matter what you do, no matter how hard you work, it doesn't always get you equal outcome. So let's go back to that idea of biases and blind spot. We've talked about implicit bias, we've talked about privilege, we've talked about influence and culture and all these other things. Some of you probably heard that expression, I don't see color, like I'm fair, like I treat everyone equally. Or, if I could, I'd vote for Obama a third time. Or maybe someone who says that, hey, like, you just don't understand, these are my values and these are the things that I hold on to, and these are why I, have these values. And of course, going back to that idea that somehow when we use that term white privilege, we're trying to erase the fact that poverty doesn't affect across the board, often irrespective of your race, but that there are differences in terms of how different racial groups experience poverty in the United States. But one of the things that we have to be really careful about in medicine, because this is something we often are very guilty of. It's like, I worked hard. Do you know how hard I studied for step one? Do you know how hard I studied to pass my boards? Like, I earned that score. I deserved to get the score that I worked hard for. But we have to realize is that these ideas about working hard, not recognizing the way we associate bias being influenced by culture, by the types of stereotypes that are and prejudice already exist, is that's how we get to that place of microaggressions. And not just microaggressions, macroaggressions. Because I know a lot of people are like, well, these microaggressions don't always feel so micro. We're going to talk about what microaggressions were intended to represent in a way that I don't think when I've gone to a lot of these talks that people really highlight. So of course, when we're talking about quote unquote macroaggressions, they are definitely deliberate, they're purposeful, they're cruel, they're malicious. They are very explicit in that they want to let it be known this is the way we are excluding and oppressing. So this is people marching in the night with tiki torches saying the Jews will not replace us. And this is often hard to see, but it's very real. This is a noose hanging from a tree. And this tree is in a public park that lots of people go to. Now, when we talk about macroaggressions, the micro assaults, which are a type of microaggression, but when those micro assaults occur, particularly in a public setting, it transforms them into more of a macroaggression. The other thing to think about is that we have, you're just a jerk and you're rude, you're inconsiderate, microaggressions fall within that spectrum. And then of course, there's still like the overarching idea of like institutional and structural racism. So macroaggressions, people that make no effort to have ramps where they're supposed to have ramps, to comply with ADA, to comply with accommodations, the things that are clearly illegal. But it's not just a legal issue, but that's one of the ways that you're like, okay, this is blatant. Voter intimidation, something that we have to be very aware of, particularly over the last few years. But I want to go back after saying that and defining microaggressions. So the first time this word ever came up, many of you may have just heard it over the last few years, maybe over the last 10 years, but we have to go all the way back to 1970. Dr. Chester Pierce, who was a Harvard psychiatrist, he used this concept of racial microaggressions. And the idea was trying to find a way to describe those incidents and those events that were subtle, but still they were constantly targeting and harming and mistreating, particularly Black people in this country. Now think about 1970. 1970 is following the civil rights movement. 1970 is following the Jim Crow and segregation. So we're talking about the KKK routinely lynching people, burning down homes, bombing churches, actively killing, freedom riders that were coming and trying to help people register to vote. It was clear. And they would be very intentional with how cruel and aggressive the violence was to terrorize people. There were the race riots of the early 1900s, including Tulsa, which we really recently celebrated 100 years. Do you know? No one's ever been convicted of what happened in Tulsa. And even now, it took until 2022 to pass a bill saying that lynching is a crime. Those were all macroaggressions. And so when he defined this term microaggressions, he was really saying, yes, there's the overt terror, there's dragging someone from the back of a truck, but there are also those day-to-day things that people don't believe you when you tell them that it's happening. But beyond that, once he put that out there, there was scholarship that we started to create around this and to realize that this had a lot of context. It wasn't just about how it made people feel, but we could really start to see the subtle discrimination that didn't just show up that was an obvious lawsuit, class action lawsuit, and particularly when it was gendered, so the micro inequities. But of course, one of the people that has really done the most work in this area and has really been like the leader was the work that Dr. Darrell Sue started doing in the 1980s. And he started to look at this as microaggressions against other marginalized and oppressed groups. Now that's the key. Remember I told you it's a spectrum. Yeah, sometimes people are jerks and they're rude. And yes, sometimes people are rude to conservatives or rude to, white people that are in majority spaces. But the key to microaggressions is the way that it targets marginalized and oppressed groups. So not by definition, by the scholarship, not everybody can claim a microaggression just based off of, I don't like the way someone treated me or disagreed with me or called me out or something like that. So let's get a little bit more into microaggressions. We can break these down, as I've alluded to, into micro insults, micro assaults, which are conscious verbal, nonverbal behavior acts, and micro invalidations, which are often unconscious communications. And particularly the insults and invalidations are the ones that come up so often in the healthcare space. Oh my gosh, you're so smart. You're so articulate. I had my own experience as a fellow, and I'm sure many of us are familiar with that concept of pimping. And, I was rounding on a weekend with one of my attendings. And of course, rounds are over. He's asking me questions. I'm answering the questions because, you answer the questions. But it was the comment he made when he was finished. Oh, guess you are smart enough to be here. As if he somehow needed to confirm for himself that I belonged at this institution that was well regarded, was a top ranked program in the country. Those are those micro insults and invalidations that happen, that no one else witnessed it. It was just him. In some ways, he absolutely didn't mean it as an insult, probably doesn't even remember saying it to me, but it still happened. And it was still this idea of how those implicit biases that came from the culture, the prejudice, the stereotypes, all the things that are historical that have led to the mis and underrepresentation and intentional exclusion of minoritized people in this country from particularly our profession, how all those things come together. So let me give you some clear examples of an insult. Let's say that you have a Black man who's walking across, got a student ID badge on. No matter where he goes, they just assume that he plays for the football team or the basketball team. Or, and this is a true story that happened to one of my mentees who's Filipino. She went away to do a rotation and she was asked, oh, where are you from? She's like, I'm from Fresno. They're like, no, like, where are you really from? She was like, Fresno. But she's like, well, where'd you grow up? Fresno. They're like, okay. And then like the next day, because she had done an amazing job on her rotation, she's an amazing person, like everybody loved her. And they brought like these cookies in, that were like from a local bakery, and they presented to her and they were just like, welcome to America. And I remember she called me. She's like, I didn't even know what to do. Like, you already asked me where I was from and I told you Fresno, but it just didn't connect from them, And again, there's this gift, like, we really like you. We're so happy you're here. You've done a great job. But then going back to what we talked about, like that invalidation that you are an alien in your own land, in the own place where you were born and grew up and a citizen of this country. So let's try something out. Let's go back to the chat. You guys are doing pretty good with that. I want you to just put in the chat a W if you're a woman, an M if you're a man, MB if you consider yourself non-binary or genderqueer or anything like that. Or if you just say, I don't really want to get into it, I'm just going to put DDD, completely decline. So just drop that in the chat for me. Because I didn't get a chance to look at the attendees before we started. So I'll get a sense of how we are broken down by gender composition. Okay. Give people a couple more seconds just to drop some answers in. And let's go to part 2. How many times in your professional environment has someone referred to you as another healthcare professional or another staff person or hospital staff person? Has it happened 1 time, 5 times, 20 times, never, more times you can count? Okay, I've got every day in all caps, so many. Okay. Many times. So this isn't something that's subtle for a lot of you, but it's different for everyone, right? Not everyone will have the same experience or answer. So remember how I told you we have this idea of meritocracy, and that because we work hard in medicine and, we have clear criteria, your step has, well, now pass fail for step one, but, MCAT has to be this, you pass your step scores, you do your board exams, and it's not completely false. Everyone has the same starting line. You have to get accepted into medical school. Everyone is going to go through challenges in medical school. Medical school is hard, so you're going to face tough exams, tough encounters in medicine, often things like the first time you lose a patient that you've taken care of. And everyone has a similar finish line. Like, you've got to get that degree, you've got to get that board certification. So we're not denying that there aren't similar starts and finishes and expectations. And we're not saying that people don't all have to work hard, but particularly those barriers, particularly the places where there are gatekeepers for certain people that aren't there for others, where certain people have privileges they can always leverage and other people may have privileges that are conditional. That's how we start to understand privilege. And we start to understand how it can be different depending on environment, how we start to understand how microaggressions can come up. And again, often not be believed or seen, even if everyone's standing right there when it happens. So a few years ago, there was the social media hashtag that took off, I look like a surgeon, because people saw this like a New Yorker cover and there's like, oh my God, like, why did this happen? But even the idea of responding to an emergency on a plane and someone just assuming you can't be the doctor because you don't fit my stereotype of what I think a doctor should look like. These microaggressions, this is from a paper that was published in 2019. There are a couple of other really good papers that have come out just in there's one really hot paper that we're all talking about that just got published with a trainee as the first author, Dr. Justin Bullock. But there are other couple of really good publications, even since 2019. There are ways that sexism, differences based on gender that happen, religion, and that includes people who are atheists. Of course, racial identity, and the number of times that, way too many, the number of times that people get off the N-word. And often, even for us as faculty, we're like, whoa, did that just happen? Okay, what do we do? These things, like many of you said, are happening every day. And they're happening often in ways that seem invisible to so many other people. But that cumulative effect on those groups that are disproportionately experiencing those microaggressions is real. Especially things around sexual orientation. If every time you get a question and it's a gay person and then the answer has something to do with HIV or testing for HIV or a complication of HIV/AIDS, can gay people go to the doctor and not have a healthcare problem that's related to AIDS? Could they just have plain old community acquired pneumonia? Could they just quote unquote have high blood pressure or just have anxiety and depression? But trying to talk it, pathologize their sexual orientation for the purpose of our learning is not helpful. So you guys have gotten off and you've been a great audience so far. Thank you so much. Let's test out what we've been talking about so far. So here's a case vignette. So we have a new staff member at your hospital, Malala Yusuf. And she's an admin assistant. She's going to work with faculty and students and even trainees. So there's a meeting because, we're all about being friendly and making sure people know each other. We have our badge buddies. So everyone knows who everyone is. And Malala's going to introduce herself. She's from Houston, Texas. She's happy to be a part, working at this great hospital. And she loves basketball. I am going to assume that she was a South Carolina fan, but I would not hold it against her if she was a UConn fan. And if you can't tell, I'm just as excited about women's basketball. And I know that we're missing the men's basketball game, but I'll probably cheat and look at some point. So we'll get us out of here so we can see the final score. But, you know, she loves basketball. She played point guard. When she gets done, it's like, oh, you don't have a Texas accent. Where are you originally from? So did a microaggression happen in this case? Yes or no? And I'll put the case back up so you can see. Anybody? So I've got a lot of yeses. Anybody not sure? Anybody want to say no? Anybody want to add in? Okay, so got a few more answers kind of across the board. Alrighty. So let's break this down a little bit. If you said yes, if you feel comfortable, just, you know, I know it's a lot of typing in the chat. What do you think the microaggression was? If you had to try to describe and explain it to someone. Okay, so a couple answers here. You know, she said she was from Texas and someone questioned that origin. Everyone from Texas has an accent. There may be the concern that because of her name, that there's a difference in like her ethnicity. And so that wouldn't be associated with someone who lives in Texas. Okay, that's good. And so just seeing again, how like bias could be coming into play. But it could be described also, right, as friendliness. Like, I want to get to know you better. I'm just curious about you. I want to know more about your background, right? And I told you all at the start of this that we should try to be curious. So Scarlett brought up a point. If she was Charlotte Smith, maybe that question would not have been asked. All right. When we talk about microaggressions, what I want you to remember is that you have to separate the intent. Someone may be curious. They may be trying to get to know someone better from the impact. In your curiosity, you made an invalidation of what she said. If she said, "Where are you from?" and she says, "I'm from Houston, Texas," she's from Houston, Texas. Now, if you want to know more, that's fine, but there are ways to ask that question without invalidating who she says she is and where she says she's from. And so that's often the hard part that people wrestle with. And for people who never have this experience, they might be like, well, I ask everybody where they're from. I just want to know. Like, I think it's a good question. You know, this is a big country and people come from all over and, you know, things like that. But if your question starts with, you can't be who you say you are, that is invalidating who that person says they are, which means they're probably a member of a marginalized group, which means you've walked into a microaggression, whether that was your intention or not. That was the impact that landed. So I often tell a story that if you have, you know, I used to live in LA, everything's Hollywood. LA is not Hollywood, but there's a lot of Hollywood there. So let's say you're out at a restaurant, it's happy hour, thank God, COVID cases are going down, you're out without your mask, it's gonna go great. You see this really cute person, you know, you talk to your friends, you finally figure out the right way to approach them, you've got like a glass of wine, you're walking towards them. As you're walking towards that person, they're standing on the other side of the bar. A server comes out from the kitchen, you know, through the bar, bumps into you, and just as you get to that person, wine spills all over them. I can't speak for you, but if it's me, knowing how both shy and clumsy I am, all I'm doing is apologizing profusely and slinking back to the corner to hide in the shadows to hopefully never be seen by that person ever again. And in scene. Now let's take a different scenario. Let's say the server doesn't bump into you. You walk over, you start talking, you make each other laugh. There's an instant connection. You start dating. A year later, you want to celebrate this anniversary of the first date you met and go back to the same restaurant where you met. And you're sitting there and you're talking and you're having a glass of wine and enjoying dinner. And all of a sudden, this person just goes, you know what? This isn't working for me. I don't want to do this anymore. I don't even like you. I don't like the way you do this. And it just turns into just insulting and cruel and malicious. I don't like your mom. I don't like your kid. Just, whatever. Like, you are appalled, you're hurt, you're angry. That same wine glass, you might conveniently toss in the direction of that person and end scene. In both cases, the other person was covered in wine. Clearly, the intention behind the wine spilling on them was very different, but the impact of a ruined shirt covered in wine is still the same. And so a lot of times what's hard for us to separate is that's not what I intended, but microaggressions, going back to what Dr. Chester Pierce first talked about, they have a cumulative effect that builds up that is very harmful to the people that are repeatedly experiencing them. And if there's nothing else that you take away, this is a very important concept. So I want to see if I can get this video to play because it goes back to this case vignette that I just showed you.
And you stayed with that company for 3 years. Great, great. Well, I think that's everything. Oh, yeah, just one more thing. Where are you from?
I'm from London.
Yes, but where are you from?
I was born in Surrey.
Okay, I don't mean like Surrey. I mean like.
Guildford.
Yes. You don't seem like you're from Guildford.
Okay, you got me.
There we go.
I was born in Cobham. I just tell people I'm from Guildford, to be cool.
Ah, right, yes. I mean, where are your family from, specifically?
Specifically, Vincent Road.
No, I mean, where are your parents from?
Mum grew up by the big Tesco's.
Yeah, before that.
She lived in Woking for a bit.
Before that?
Brighton Polytechnic. She dropped out, though, so it doesn't really count.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, way back.
You mean where she was conceived? Knowing Granny and Grandad, probably the Premier Inn.
No.
No, you're right. That wasn't built until the 90s.
Where are your grandparents from?
They still live by the big Tesco's.
What's your background?
Musical theatre.
Where are you from originally?
You mean which hospital?
No! Why are you brown?
Bit racist, that.
So again, it's all about the making it to fit your perspective or whatever your bias or blind spot or stereotype or even prejudice or things that like that may be, even if it's from a place of genuine curiosity. It's again, focusing on where's the insult, the invalidation, the obviously even assault that may occur. So here's the thing. We have these talks and everyone tells you, explains all this stuff to you. And like I said, there are a couple of things I want you to take away from this talk. Understanding the difference between intent and impact. Also understanding why we call them microaggressions. There's a historical context for when this concept first made it into the literature. But there's another part. A lot of times we talk about bias and we talk about privilege and all these things. And people are like, well, I'm uncomfortable, or you're trying to make me feel bad, or I feel guilty and I don't know what to do. But that's just the start, right? Having that awareness and then going back to what we talked about, being able to accept it and then figuring out, okay, what can I do? What are the ways that I can leverage a difference? What are the ways that I can affect change when I encounter these situations? So one, we have to be really vigilant against all the ways that we start to dehumanize people. And it is something that is a non-negotiable for us in medicine. It's not the drug addict. It's not the sickler. It's not the diabetic. These are people with full lives, people who have other people that may really love them and or really hate them. But the idea that there are connections, and that there are connections still to be made, and that we have to see people even when they're their most vulnerable, they're sick, they're not at their best, to focus in on the shared humanity. And a lot of times, because we do get all these images from the media, we have all this historical context from things that are baked into the way we're taught medicine, we have to be intentional about counter stereotyping. I remember someone sharing with me at a conference, she was like, I'm an ER physician. The only time that because of who I am, where I live and what I do, the only time that I saw young Black men were when they were often coming in as victims of violence into the emergency room. She didn't have another context for Black men. So that idea for counter stereotyping for her was intentional and was real, because she needed something else to put into her brain for her brain to see and categorize Black men as fully human and not as aggressors or victims of violence in the communities that, again, it's a whole other talk when we talk about how these communities have been structured this way through laws and legislation, policies, programs, and practices. But the counter stereotyping is really critical to that. The other part of this is we talk about improving our IQ, so we do well in exams, improving our EQ, so we have the appropriate compassion and ways to counterbalance some of the burnout and moral injury that happens in our profession. But I challenge you to really think about this work as improving your cultural intelligence. And I prefer that to telling you to become culturally competent. I'm not even fully competent in my own culture, much less anyone else's. But every day is an opportunity to learn. Because the idea is we can do things that will change our behaviors, even if we can't always catch those implicit biases, those things that we've absorbed from the culture, that we can put things in the place to be like, oh, I see that, and I need to be cognizant to do this differently. Some of the ways that are very easy, but often overlooked, is the language that we use, and particularly our language that's extraordinarily ableist. We have this idea that you have to be strong and you have to be healthy, and we have an idea of what that looks like in terms of healthy and able bodies, and who is seen as less than and incapable, and particularly how we treat people with disabilities when they come to us for care. And language is only an immediate intervention. It's a tip of the iceberg. But again, these are also some references to ways that we can think about both writing, talking, and speaking in ways that really put the focus on inclusivity and are constant reminders to fully humanize people. Now, something that we've come up with in responding to microaggressions is this rubric, and I'll go through it fairly quickly with you. One, be in the moment and realize oh my gosh, that just happened. I'm uncomfortable. I don't like that. Did anybody else notice it? So often we try to be like, oh no, I'm overreacting. I'm being sensitive. I'm being in my feelings. But our emotions are there for a reason. They're often that first trigger, that first warning system. You should validate those experiences. So that's something that you always do and maintain a certain authenticity to how you approach these issues. Then the next set of things that we do are really more about how we call people in, because often, especially since microaggressions may be unintentional and unconscious, and there's not necessarily a malicious intent or action, you can really use that opportunity to call people in, to help them and yourself learn in the process. And we can do the things that we already do well as physicians. We can just ask questions like, could you tell me exactly what you mean when you say da-da-da? Or wait, what exactly do you want me to take away from this counter? Do you want me to learn that every time I see this patient, I should always think this? What about this? So there's just the power of questions in a way that's very scholarly, very academic, and very appropriate. I mean, particularly for our internal medicine people, right? The broad differential. Another thing that's really effective, at least I know it works on me, is to mirror back exactly what the person said. Some people don't realize what they've said until you say what they said, and they're like, oh wait, let me fix that, right? Give them that grace to fix it, to try to fix it, or at least to try to understand what may have been wrong with it. And so, you know, and sometimes it's also not just what they said, but the emotion that they're acting from. So they may say one thing that's really reflecting a frustration and anger, you know, the whole Snickers commercial, you're not you when you're hungry. So I was often in a meeting once with someone I knew that was a huge advocate for women. And there was a junior faculty person there and the senior faculty woman. And I mean, she just laid into this junior faculty. And I just was like, oh my gosh, what is happening? And I was uncomfortable. And we'll get to kind of like what you do in the moment versus what you can do privately. And at the time, you know, I did speak up for the junior faculty person, but I didn't necessarily challenge someone who was my senior as well. But then I reached out to that person kind of after the meeting, like, hey, can we talk? And I really went in like with that inquiry, like, I know that you really care about this. And in this meeting, I was just kind of confused. Help me understand. You seemed really critical and I didn't understand why, you know, or it didn't just seem the way you would normally support us in meetings. And that created a space for that person to respond because I really spoke back to what that person I knew cared about deeply, but how that person had kind of, for lack of a better word, failed in that moment. And, you know, we talked about, I left it alone. And then later I found out that she had reached out to that junior faculty person, had apologized, you know, things like that. So those are getting into that idea is that none of us are perfect. I often tell people, please don't commit a microaggression trying to respond to a microaggression. But often, as hard as it is, especially in today's time, we have to kind of assume the best of each other. And even when that's hard, at least assume that you don't have all the facts, that you don't have that full perspective or that 360 view. And trust me, that's hard, especially when people sometimes are just really awful. But we can't assume that every single time everyone is just awful. There has to be those opportunities to remind ourselves we are in positions to sometimes call people in. And again, as I mentioned, that may mean that if you freeze in the moment and you're like, oh my God, I don't know what to do. I don't know if I should say anything. It doesn't mean like that moment is gone forever. Often it's better for people to not be in the moment because you can really go to that person and be like, hey, can we talk through what happened last week? I actually had someone do that to me. I didn't even realize I had said something in a meeting. And they came to me and they were like, you know what, can we talk about this? And they were like, hey, when you said this is kind of the way it made me feel. And obviously, I'm human, I make mistakes, and I'm the person teaching you about microaggressions. And I was like, oh. But I appreciate the fact that we had that time to talk through it. And I could see something that I really hadn't seen in the moment. And so even if you feel like you didn't have the right, perfect response when it happened, there are often ways to come back to it. And if nothing else, that won't be your only chance to make a difference and to speak up. That being said, there are times, particularly when those micro assaults are happening, where you have to do something. And so when I speak up could just be simply a pausing to be like, whoa, and just looking around to see if anyone else is validating what you're feeling and experiencing in the moment. It could just be a ouch. It doesn't have to be an elaborate soliloquy of all the things you've learned about microaggressions and everything that was wrong with what that person just said. It doesn't even have to be angry. It could just be, hold up. Because sometimes people just need that pause, because then that other person who needed a little bit more time to react can then just be like, yeah, that made me uncomfortable too. And being able to bring people together to point those things out, so it's not just you by yourself, can be really effective when you're dealing with those microaggressions. I had one more case here, but I do want to leave some time for you all to ask me questions. So I'm going to skip ahead because it's a little bit long and just talk about a few other ways to kind of intervene. When there are microaggressions, we want you just not to be the person who witnesses them, but to really be able to respond. And not just respond, but be intentional in putting micro affirmations, just like you can have a microaggression. So if someone is like, being grilled on, well, no, where are you really from? Someone like me could be like, well, I'm from the South. Do you want to hear how many different Southern accents I can pull off for you? Because I'd be really happy to do that if you'd like. Just let me know. I mean, literally, I can go in and out of several. And sometimes it's a way of making it humorous, but it's also kind of pointing out that maybe that assumption they have, first of all, a Texas accent is different from, North Texas, South Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Georgia, Tennessee, South Carolina. Us Southerners kind of feel a certain way about that type of thing. But a part of what you want to do, and that's why it's important to not just think about, oh, this is rude or something happens, but to really speak to what that microaggression is doing. Is it making someone feel like they don't belong here? Is it making someone feel like they aren't smart enough, or that they are smarter than you would expect them to be? Is it reinforcing stereotypes about certain groups? If you yourself commit a microaggression, again, I've done it, pause on that pushback. Sometimes if you don't know anything else, just listen and validate. Remember, that's that first part of what is vital to do with a microaggression, is to validate what that person is saying to you. And again, if you don't even have it all figured out, just say thank you, or thank you for sharing that with me. Because again, that validation is something we have to always do when it comes to microaggressions. And Google is free for now. So I want to leave you with a few other things. Everyone has to do this work themselves. And I think this is a great kind of like model that's been put out there. And think about the ways that you're responsible for diversity, equity, inclusion, for anti-racism, for fighting xenophobia, ableism, and really thinking about being prepared for what you're going to do before these things happen, and not just thinking about trusting yourself to know what to do in the moment, right? So with this challenge, I encourage you to be brave. And when I say brave, create spaces where you do talk about these things and you figure out how you can be prepared for them when you encounter them. And this is what's in Justin Willock's paper that just came out on microaggressions. You can be respectful and still challenge people on the things that maybe they are doing that are problematic. Because the idea is we have to stop expecting other people to suffer to maintain comfort, to maintain silence around mistreatment. And a part of that is understanding the historical context for these things. And a lot of that I didn't get to touch on tonight. I want you to validate the experiences of people that may be different from you, and the way that people may be marginalized in some ways and not marginalized in others. And then focus on not just your own individual accountability, but ways that you can push your institution to take action accountability. We talk about this word being an ally. Being an ally isn't just a picture that you put on Instagram. It isn't just a donation that you make to an organization. It's doing work that is inherently uncomfortable and difficult, and sometimes comes with cost, because you're recognizing how many people have continued to bear costs day in and day out that have been erased, that have been intentionally excluded, that have been made invisible. There has to bring, another nerdy reference, some balance to the force. So with that, I will say thank you and stop, and then we can hopefully open up for more conversations and really get at this tough stuff that you're working on day to day. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Walker. So we do have time for Q&A at this point. Please go ahead and type your questions in. We'd love to hear from you. So Dr. Farouk, I'll pass it off to you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, and thank you so much, Dr. Walker. That was an absolutely phenomenal talk. I've heard a lot of discussions, a lot of talks on this topic, and you brought a really, a fresh perspective. So I really appreciate hearing it, and I loved all the acronyms that you had. It makes it easier to kind of, remember these things. So I just want to encourage everyone to please post your questions in the chat. And, I wanted to actually share something specifically about the language that you had talked about, where you think you had a slide saying instead of using like these ableist language, like and use these alternatives. I think that to me was something I've never actually seen before in a discussion, and I really, really liked it. And I just wanted to point that out, that that was original, at least for me, and very useful as a resident. So thank you. And I'll start with our first question. How do you apply these approaches to patients who are asking some of these questions? For example, where are you from?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, again, you can just respond like, oh, I'm from Jersey. Why do you want to know? Do you have family in Jersey? Like literally, you can turn it around on them. And just, again, you can use that idea of inquiry and asking them questions, and at the same time, kind of mirroring the question back to them. And then if they say something like, oh, well, you don't seem like you're from Jersey, be like, well, where are you from? And they're like, oh, I'm from here. Be like, oh, I would have never thought you were from here. You seem more like people I've met in Florida, and so again, I mean, and it's a way of doing it. There's a certain, there might be a little bit of sarcasm to it, truthfully, but again, just it's more of kind of reflecting that back to them, but doing it in a way that, you do have to recognize, and I like the way Dr. Duncan put it, there is a therapeutic relationship, and often there is still a hierarchy with you as the clinician versus the patient. But I think that idea of creating a space where you're expecting respect, and that you do have psychological safety, it can be different, because obviously if it's something more around gender and like around harassment, first and foremost, maintaining your safety. Let me be perfectly clear. So that to me is the most important thing, assessing if you're safe. And if you need to back up, and if you need to create a boundary because your safety comes first, I don't want you trying to figure out, oh, like, how do I figure out the right way to respond when, you're potentially placing yourself in a situation that will be harmful to you. But I think that being said, it can also be helpful to just say something like, I'm sure you may not have meant that as disrespectful. You may have meant it as a compliment, but often because of who I am as a woman and as a physician, I often get disrespected. And so it's easy to interpret that a different way than you intended. And you can even call them on it. Like, I'm sure you wouldn't want to disrespect me. So, I would be more comfortable with our relationship if we didn't talk in that way. And again, it's polite, but it is also helping you establish a boundary while still not assuming the worst of the person.
Awesome, that was great. Thank you, Dr. Walker. I think I have, let me see. Oh, okay, perfect. And so,
Yeah, that's a great.
okay, go ahead, sorry.
I was going to say, it's a question from Adam about navigating the power dynamic. Absolutely tricky, particularly if you're a student or if you're a trainee and it's the chair of your department, or it's the person who writes the best letters of recommendation. These are times where you really do kind of have to think about, is this a one-on-one situation? Is there a group there? One of the things that I put in the chat was a link to an article about the 5 Ds that you can take. And this was, the article was focused on like sexual harassment, but those 5 Ds can be applied in often in situations. So there are ways that you can kind of deflect kind of the statement that's being made or the situation that's happening. But there are also times where you need to report. And often, particularly as trainees, there are ways to report that truly are anonymous. I know there are a lot of reporting that's not anonymous. But remember, you do have, like in particular, ombudsmen at institutions that are at the institution, and they may not even be, housed at the medical school or at your training program. That can be like another reporting source as a way of kind of, if you need to go outside of the training program, just to protect that anonymity as well. And so I think the big thing is the isolation around it. You know, there's so much of medicine that's still in silence, where people just whisper about things and people don't know things until it happens to them. So there are even ways to just kind of check in with people and find ways to have people kind of agree. Like, I remember I had a faculty member who was relaying to me something that happened when she was a trainee. There was a physician and attending who had a notorious reputation, and she and another woman medical student showed up for call that night. And she was like, we are sticking together no matter what. There's never going to be a time where one of us is alone with him. It's horrible that you have to plan something in that way. But again, like, being clear about who the problem people are, reporting incidents, because often people get away with things because everyone only whispers. So there are tricky dynamics. Sometimes you can't always respond in the moment. You do need to find that time outside of the moment, because calling out your attending in front of everyone may not go well for you. But if you have that opportunity for one-on-one, I know something I've started doing is I've asked my own trainees, I was like, is there anything I can do better that you think could help the learning environment? And I will tell them, like, my job is not just to teach you, but to also lead an environment that is safe and is optimized for learning, because people feel safe and they feel included. And if I'm not doing that because there's something I'm not seeing, please tell me. That's something I invite, but sometimes also, if you find yourself in those feedback situations, if there are ways to kind of like sneak those questions in as a part of feedback, and kind of getting people to kind of reflect. Because again, people think their intent is one thing, and I'll give you a good example. I like to use myself because I've made plenty of mistakes. Back when I was younger and a little bit more in shape, you know, you're on your IC rotation, you're working all the time, you don't really have time to exercise. So we would go down to radiology rounds, and after radiology rounds, 5 flights of stairs back up. I'm like, if I don't get any other exercise, take the stairs, right? Take the stairs, it's good for you. And I'm like, come on, as a team, let's do it. And people hated it. Like, I'm tired, I don't want to take the stairs. And I was just like, I was just trying to do something good that would promote healthy behavior. But I also didn't think about how ableist that was, just assuming that everybody could just take 5 flights of stairs. It wasn't my intention, but the impact that it had on certain trainees and students was different than it had on others. So it wasn't like I could just tell people, you have to do this because I'm the attending and this is what we're going to do as a team. I can take the stairs all I want. But again, my intention was very different from my impact. And I had to get that feedback in order to see that and understand it.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Dr. Walker. There's so many different scenarios where I can see that, and something I didn't recognize, you know, whether or not one of your residents is pregnant, or if, you know, they have some sort, you know, the idea of like invisible disabilities is really important, and I think something that we all need to become more aware of. I did have a question, and it's a little bit of a specific question, and I hope it doesn't come across as yeah, I'll just ask it. Maybe you'll understand why I'm a little bit hesitant, but I come across as to a lot of people as a white woman, and for most of my med school and residency, I have unfortunately, you know, I've had a lot of privilege in because of this, but it's also put me in very unusual situations where people will casually say things that are very racist, and just joke and then say, oh, ha ha ha, like, don't you agree with that? Or they'll make comments about like other religions or, just, and I'm taken aback because a part of me, initially was very much like, I don't even know what to say. There's so much shock value. And I think over time, especially by attending lectures like this, I've seen like what are some like concrete things that I can do. But what sort of specific advice do you have for people who find themselves in situations like that, where you're sort of expected to be like, you're supposed to joke about it and laugh at it and not be the serious one who's like, why are you taking it so seriously, type of thing. So
I think, if you don't want to go straight to serious and like kind of telling them off, right? Because you're trying to like ride that fine line, shock works too. Like, oh, I didn't expect you to say that. Oh, I wasn't ready for that joke today. And it's not, at least it gives you kind of that second to kind of like process your emotion and kind of process that shock. Because you say something, even if you're not sure exactly how to respond or what to do next, because it's really honest. If you say, oh, I wasn't expecting you to say that, or didn't see that coming, that's honest. That's honestly how you are reacting in the moment. And just be like, oh, I mean, I've never cracked a joke like that before. Like, oh, I'm sorry, that's not funny to me. It actually makes me feel this way. It makes me feel uncomfortable because of people I know and other situations I've been in. I get it. We definitely need to joke around and laugh. We've all had a rough day at work, but it just makes me feel uncomfortable. And I think if you focus back on the I part of it, then it's less about saying you're not funny, you're not racist. It's I'm uncomfortable with what you just said, and I'm uncomfortable because of these things. But I think just giving yourself that moment to react and acknowledge your shock. So that goes back to that first part of vitals. Validate that immediate reaction, because that's really, be it shock, fear, anger, discomfort, just not trying to be like, oh my gosh, how do I recover from the emotion? Acknowledge the emotion and have a response that acknowledges the emotion, because then that kind of like unhijacks your brain and kind of gives you that time that you need to kind of go, what am I going to say? Okay, now what am I going to say? Does that make sense? Is that helpful?
yeah, absolutely. No, that's great advice. I think, you hit the nail on the head with, it's so unexpected and you're just like, what just happened? And I think just acknowledging that, like you said, is really helpful. So thank you. And I don't see any other questions. Give people a few more seconds, but I don't see anything else in the chat. So
Just acknowledge Juan Amador for just like dropping all the references that I mentioned that I didn't get a chance to include in my presentation. Thank you so much for adding those. For people who are still on the call, definitely click on some of those or just, save them for later. And thanks for putting my contact information. And yes, absolutely, I really mean it. You can send me a tweet, you can email me. I love connecting with people and really talking through this stuff together.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Walker. It was such a pleasure to have you today. And I know everyone came away with a lot of good pearls. So we really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you very much. And with that, it's time to wrap up. Please do give us your feedback on today's presentation by filling out the evaluation that will pop up on your screen as soon as the webinar ends. We did record the session and we'll make it available within 3 to 5 business days. You may access that archive by using the same login information you used for this live webinar. We'll also send a follow-up email with a link to the recording. On behalf of the Association of American Medical Colleges, thank you again to our speaker and of course, everyone for joining us. Have a wonderful evening and you may now disconnect.